want to welcome you. I know you're very, very busy, and I actually follow you on social media, and I know how you're doing so many things all the time. So thank you so much for making time for us. And my show is, it is what it means in layman's terms. We try to go into some things that are complex, and we just try to make them into ways that people can understand, so that the people who don't have time, the people who were like me 25 years ago, I was raising a family, I was paying taxes, I was moving up in my career. I tried to watch a little bit of football on Saturday. I just driving the kids to sports and so on. You don't have time to get into some of the deep issues, but if we can combined talk to them about what you're doing in a way that just makes sense, so that they can walk away and go, oh wow, there's someone who's doing something really good out there, and that's very, very interesting. So that's who I am. That's what I'm trying to do. I found your background fascinating. I found what you're doing fascinating. I'm gonna ask a lot of questions, and I'm gonna try not to get too wonkish because of the title of who I'm trying to do. Uh, so tell us about you. Where you grew up, college, and then beyond that, and of course the things that you're doing today. And I have a question already on the ETF that you have, but I'll wait. I'll hold back.
Well, it's an honor to be here, Guy. Thanks for the opportunity. I grew up in South Florida, public high school graduate, went off to college in DC, studied economics. Actually dropped out after my sophomore year to launch what's called a hedge fund. So I was working for 5 years running my own macro hedge fund, which means that the strategy was based on predicting which way the Fed was going to go and what the impact would be on the interest rate market and the currency market and so on. After that, I went on to work for another hedge fund for almost 3 years. I left there last year to launch Azoria, which is this pro meritocracy free thinking investment firm. And to your point, we just launched our first ETF last month. It's now trading on the New York Stock Exchange. It's called the Azoria 500 Meritocracy Fund, and it is an anti-DEI ETF. It owns the same stocks as your BlackRock or Vanguard S&P 500 ETF, with one exception. It does not own any company with an explicit DEI hiring quota. And the premise is really simple, Guy. Companies that hire on race and gender will underperform those that hire on skill and merit. And so when we start with 500 companies and we exclude the 38 that hire with DEI in mind, what we're effectively doing is we're excluding the losers and the laggards that we think will weigh down your portfolio in the long run. We kick them out, and then we use the residual, we use the leftover money and buy more of the stocks that are hiring the best and brightest and not apologizing for it.
That's so. It's you hit right to the middle of the point that I was gonna discuss. Obviously I was a venture capitalist, so I know hedge funds very well. Uh, but to our audience, hedge funds are well. You go ahead, but quickly on a hedge fund, so that and I'll fill in just a little bit.
Absolutely. So a hedge fund it's effectively a speculative vehicle. It is where high net worth individuals, small family offices, pension funds pool their assets together, and then as one pooled asset ends up taking positions in markets. And so some of the trades that I worked on were betting that inflation was going to be a lot higher under Joe Biden's presidency than everyone thought at the time in 2021. That was a phenomenal trade, along with the Fed being too late to raise interest rates in 2022 in response to the Biden Harris hyperinflation. And so it's really about thinking at a high level, top down. A lot of hedge funds focused on the bottom up. What are NVIDIA's earnings going to be this quarter? What is the next iPhone going to do in terms of sales? Whereas the macro hedge fund that I ran and the macro work that I did was really about the big picture, top down. How is the
Okay.
economy going to look in 6 months? Is the Fed going to be cutting? What's going to happen in the interest rate curve, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, so to our audience, so James raises money from different sources, yeah, institutions, sometimes rich individuals, and then he gets to trade. He gets a fee and a piece of the action, and he gets to trade, as opposed to what I did in venture capital, where once people commit to my fund for 10 years, they're committed. In James's case, they can actually do a redemption, which means they can actually get their money back whenever they decide they want to. So it's a little more speculative, but hedge funds are also, since they're in the stock market mostly, they're more liquid than we would be in the venture capital world. So that's it's thank you. So did I see it on, was it on one of your posts where you showed the performance of DEI companies versus non? Was that one of yours? Because I
It
remember
was.
seeing it. I remember seeing it and going, "Oh my gosh," you know. So you did quantitative analysis. You picked obvious names that do the DEI have been in the DEI space, and you showed that they had underperformed the market at large. Is that how the analysis was done?
That's exactly right. That's exactly
Okay.
right. And the way it works, Guy, is there are 38 companies in the S&P 500 that have DEI hiring quotas. What is a DEI hiring quota? A lot of companies have DEI, right? DEI means different things depending on who you ask. It can go anywhere from having a training session on pronouns all the way to the most pernicious form of DEI, which is literally as a company saying, we have to hire X percentage of Black workers. 1 in 3 must be female. 1 in 2 must be racially or ethnically diverse. And you think about it, you're either hiring the best and brightest or you're not. Full stop, no equivocation. You're either hiring on merit or you are not. And so, what we ended up finding is that companies that were hiring using these DEI quotas that were strictly quantitatively saying we must hire a certain percentage of Black, Hispanic workers, that those companies were underperforming. And gee, is that really a surprise? Is it really a surprise that when a company comes out and says that we have to hire a certain people of certain race no matter what? Well, first off, it means that you're going to hire people who are not qualified. That has a real cost to your business because there's increased turnover, increased training. The second is because you're hiring someone who's unqualified, you didn't hire someone who was qualified. And so, what is the long term repercussion of time and again not hiring highly qualified people who would bring real talent to your company? And the last one, and this is not one that gets enough airtime, is that when you create a culture where people are constantly looking over their shoulder about and wondering, did I really get hired because of my race? Did I really get hired? Am I really here because of what I bring to the table? Or am I just here because I am a pawn in a reverse caste system? And if you combine all those three things together, we think that explains why companies that have DEI quotas have underperformed the S&P 500 by 19 percentage points over the last 2 years. When you underperform by that much, you end up dragging down the rest of the index. Look, the S&P has done well over the last 2 years, but the moral of the story, Guy, is it would have done even better had you kicked out these DEI losers that were just holding back the rest of your stocks. Kick them out, use those dollars elsewhere, and that's what the S&P 5, that's what the Azoria 500 Meritocracy Fund does. Our ticker is SPXM. We launched a month ago and it's off to a smashing start.
Okay, so I was going to ask you what you had compared it against, and it was the S&P index. Has anyone of your stature, i.e., somebody credible, on the other side, tried to push back on your analysis?
They have. They have. And the most common pushback
And
is
and
citing
what are
this.
they saying? Because
Well, yeah, the common pushback that we get is this McKinsey study from 2020 entitled Diversity Wins. And it's a cherry picked study that looks
I
at
remember that.
companies that are not public. First off, many of the companies are not public. And it looks at arbitrary financial metrics, things like EBITDA, as opposed to really what matters if you're a shareholder, which is did the stock go up and by how much? And so what we have really done is focus very clearly on 500 companies that span a wide range of industries, of services, products, et cetera, and then just focus on, do these companies actually have quotas, yes or no? If they do, exclude them. If they don't, keep them in and then double down on them.
Okay, so another question I have, which is, you know, I get a lot of wealth managers always come to me and they want to pitch me, and then they show me how the markets did and how their fund did with with the market, and it's always kind of cherry picked, which I find they might think I'm stupid because they're like, this is what I did, and this of course they're writing the market in general, and of course you know, I always come back and say, well, do you have a 10-year, do you have 10-year data? Do you have 15-year data? So to challenge you just because I'm going to try to be fair. I believe
Absolutely.
everything you're
I
saying.
welcome the pushback.
I'm a meritocracy guy. Um, if we had looked at 10 years of the same data, uh, and have you and should you, because this way you can definitely make that point that much more clear.
Absolutely.
So would
Well,
yeah,
we
go
would
ahead.
love to. The only reason we can't, Guy, is because DEI quotas largely did not exist prior to 2020. It was the George Floyd riots, the summer of love, as they want us to call it, from 2020, that sparked this so-called racial reckoning that forced every company from Starbucks to Nike to Airbnb to adopt these quotas, which are closer to racial communism than they are to a meritocracy. And so sadly, we can't generate 10 years of data because these things haven't been around for 10 years, these quotas. But I think it's
I
a
see.
really great question. I wish we could answer it. But I think it often goes to that common sense test, right? I might call it grandma economics, if you will. Guy, would you invest in a barber shop if the owner came to you and said, "Hey, I want a $25,000 investment, you get a 10% stake in the company." And then you ask the owner, "Well, you are going to hire the best barbers no matter what, right?" And then he responds, "Well, no, actually, the next 1 in 3 barbers we hire have to be black or have to be transgender." That is not a company that you would have confidence in investing in. Whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, whether you voted for President Trump or not, I think most Americans recognize that what makes America great is that we hire the best people for the job no matter what. Whether that person is white, black, straight, or gay, it doesn't matter. Meritocracy rules. And so in many respects, we don't have the precise data on S&P 500 companies, but we do have timeless examples throughout history of companies, countries, systems adopting meritocracies and seeing outsized success in that post adoption period as opposed to the pre adoption period.
Okay. One more time. So let's say I'm a detractor of yours, I'm Tom Piketty or whatever, whoever these guys are, right? And I'm saying, you know what, I don't buy it. I think that it's really important that we do this. And At the end of the day, you're such a capitalist, bad person. All you think about is the stock price. But we have stakeholders here, the usual arguments. How do we talk to the common sense Americans? And you did a great job with the barbershop analogy here. How do we continue to make that and not let people paint you in a certain way that is unfair? And I mean, again, I follow your social media, so I follow all the idiotic comments that people come back to you as, and I kind of scratch my head a little. And from now on, I'm gonna actually weigh in on your favor in a rational and common sense way. But how do we people who believe in meritocracy, which is, I'm gonna say, probably 70 to 80% of Americans of all races, all creeds, all, it doesn't matter, all religions. How do we keep them comfortable with that notion and not have them get guilted into, well, corporations have bigger responsibilities than just what James Fishback wants from them, you know.
I appreciate the
And
pushback.
Milton Friedman, by the way, you're in good company.
Yes.
You and Milton Friedman.
Yeah, I I think you're right. And I think part of it, and I say this as an unapologetic conservative, I think that you start the conversation just being honest. We have to be honest that one of the longest forms of anti meritocratic practices was not DEI. It was the person running a law firm only hiring people that he knew, that looked like him, that went to his fraternity at his state college, et cetera, et cetera. That's where I think we have to start the conversation and say that no, that conservatives
Yeah.
have been guilty of this in the past, just as I think many progressive identities are guilty of this today. And so that's how I would start the conversation out. That while it's the progressive ideology that seems to be against meritocracy today, in many respects, it was an ideology that was anti. Sorry, let me start that again, if I may.
Sure.
Well, I think the way you push back on that, guy, is I think you push back with honesty. Well, sorry, Guy, I'm looking at it. Well, Guy, I think the way you start off is you start off with honesty, the way you push back on that. And you say, well, honestly speaking, DEI is not the first form of an anti-meritocratic hiring practice. When you go back to the 1950s, and men in law firms and consulting firms and ad agencies only hired men who looked like them, who went to colleges like them, who maybe only went to their specific fraternity, that is not meritocratic either. And so whether you're just hiring people because of legacy status, because they went to your college or were part of your fraternity, or whether you hired people because you view them to be oppressed in some modern day caste system, those are wrong. That is wrong. I think we have to be honest that when there have been numerous academic studies that have shown that if you are an African American applicant with a certain sounding name, you are more likely to have your resume tossed aside. That is not meritocratic either. And so the victims of an anti-meritocratic hiring system range from white men to black men, from Jews to Christians to Muslims to Hindus. And we have to be honest about that. And so the way we can really solve this very simply is a colorblind, name blind hiring process. Let's lean on quantitative metrics to get people in the door. I meet smart people every day at community colleges, smart people every week who go to state colleges, who will never get a first round interview at Goldman Sachs or at Morgan Stanley. And that's because they don't go to Harvard, they don't go to Penn, they didn't go to Georgetown. It's that simple. That's not fair. It's not meritocratic that only Goldman Sachs only shows up at Georgetown, Penn, Harvard, or NYU to recruit candidates. I live in rural Florida. I've never seen Goldman Sachs recruiters at North Florida College, a community college here, even though there are so many bright young men and women there. And so I'm going to call a spade a spade. I'm going to focus on meritocratic threats wherever they exist. Right now, the systemic threat to meritocracy is with DEI programs. But when colleges and universities get disproportionate access to interviews, that isn't meritocracy either.
I think that's that again, perfect explanation, right? Again, we're talking to people that in our audience who want to be able to have that discussion and not be shamed. And I think you're giving enough ammunition to push back, which is this has nothing to do with anything that you want to make it believe. It has to do with I want the best person for this job description that I have here, because whoever they are, because anytime that I have the best person, by definition, I'm going to succeed. And then the pushback is, well, there's bias already in place, but you said it already. There's bias. Goldman Sachs doesn't go to San Mateo Community College. So there's why isn't that a problem if other things are? So again, great analysis on this. So tell me about your fund. So how hard or easy is it to choose companies, and how do you keep the competitive advantage, even if you care, right? Maybe you don't, because we might as well have a much better a competitive system that pushes meritocracy rather than no competitors. But how did you come up with the idea, and how did you find the companies, and what do you continue as you go forward?
I came up with the idea because I was thinking about a way that we could take the power of passive index investing, this idea that you just own the top 500 stocks in America no matter what. That's been a really successful strategy that's outperformed private equity and hedge funds and all sorts of stock pickers. But I thought to myself, how could we incrementally make it just a little bit better? And the thinking was a single criteria that would separate the winners from the losers. That if you own the top 500 companies, that among those 500, there are going to be companies that are exceptionally poised to do well and companies that are not. And that was the beginning of it. And I drew on my childhood. I thought about something that my mom always told me, Guy, which was she's an immigrant from South America. Her skin is as dark as President Obama's. And she said, I would never apply to a company with a big affirmative action program because if I got hired, I would want to get hired for who I am, not to check their box. And gosh, that stuck with me because
That's very powerful.
in America, every worker deserves dignity in their work. They deserve the dignity of knowing that they are on the job because of their God-given skills and talents, that they're not on the job just to fit some random racial quota. And every American also deserves the dignity of knowing that if they didn't get the job, they didn't get it because they weren't just qualified enough yet, as opposed to having someone use their race or their sex or their religion against them. And that's what a DEI quota does. I mean, to give someone preferential treatment, by definition, you have to give someone inferior treatment. And so we started this journey. We launched the idea at Mar-a-Lago, actually, in December of last year, right after the election. President Trump was there, Kathy Wood of ARK Invest, Kevin Roberts of the Heritage Foundation. We had a really honest conversation about the future of investing and why the future of investing was really in investing in meritocracies. The fund goes live in the New York Stock Exchange last month. We brought in over $40 million in just the first month, and we are off to a start. And I think, look, this is an experiment. I put my career on the line here, put my credibility on the line. At the end of the day, we'll look back in 5 years, Guy, and we'll say, how did SPXM do versus SPY versus a standard S&P 500 ETF? That will be the real empirical outcome of the decade, I think, for investing. And there's no amount of back test and study and analysis that will compare it to just looking at those two ETFs 5 years from now
Sure.
and see which does better.
And is there a size that is there an optimal size when you're doing this, or probably not, right? Because it's since it's a ETF, you're just putting percentages in certain companies and avoiding others. So is there optimal size, or is it just as much as you can, or do you have your own limits as to managing?
Well, really, it's as big as we can have it be. I mean, the idea here is to take real market share away from the S&P 500 ETFs from BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street. And so I think we've done that. We've heard from countless investors who have reached out saying, I sold my Vanguard, I sold my State Street S&P ETF, I put all my money in the Azoria Meritocracy ETF SPXM because I don't want my portfolio held back from companies that are not committed to hiring the best and brightest.
That that's to me again just so fascinating because probably a lot of these same people are the people who go home and write a check to the environmental organizations and a lot of the far left uh, organizations. But can you again, so in layman's term, this is something that I've been paying attention to, BlackRock, all these guys, they had these rules where when they vote, so I'm on a bunch of public boards and I see how the votes come in usually on things. And they have these rules of unless you have DEI or something that resembles it, the proxy votes are either against you or you get an ISS kind of a almost threatening. I've gotten them letters saying,
Yeah,
"Hey, we just noticed that fill in the blank, right? You don't have enough left-handed Lebanese guys on your board,
sure.
and it's not. We're not telling you what to do, but so how do you tell us about that situation? Because I think that's something that everybody who has an IRA out there, or everybody who has a invests, should know about that.
That's exactly right. And they throw their weight around, and they throw their weight around. I mean, what we want, what we expect BlackRock to do is to use their voice, to use their influence to say, well, you're pursuing bad business practices. We want you to stop that, or we're going to have to pull capital. What they're instead doing is you are not having enough DEI. You are not outwoking the competition. Therefore, we will have to pull capital. And so it's one of those things that when you have that leverage, you have that awesome responsibility of being a fiduciary for quite literally millions of Americans. You should take that responsibility seriously. And what we do at Azoria is when we have to vote your shares, we're only concerned about what is good business. We vote for that. We vote against bad business. It is bad business for Starbucks to come out and say that 35% of their baristas have to be racially or ethnically diverse. Guy, what on earth does that have to do with making a good cup of coffee at a profit? And so many of these businesses in America, it's really about labor. It's about the quality of labor. So many American companies are effectively service-based companies, right? We don't necessarily go to Starbucks because of the beans. We go to Starbucks because of the customer service that we can get in and out of there, get our favorite drink as we would in Milwaukee, as we would in Miami, as we would in LA. And that is ultimately something that is left up to services, to human capital. And when you say that human capital is just disposable, that we're going to swap people out based on the shade of melanin, that is a recipe for disaster. We're seeing this play out. It's not a coincidence that companies like Cracker Barrel have done what they've done, got real pushback, saw a real boycott, and literally had to have the president of the United States use his bully pulpit. Right? Where was BlackRock? Where was Vanguard? Vanguard is the largest shareholder in all of Cracker Barrel. Where on earth were they coming out and saying, what you are doing is boneheaded? This is not about, oh, I disagree about this or I disagree about that. Objectively, what Cracker Barrel was doing is they were alienating the very people who patronize their business. That is
Yeah.
it. And Cracker Barrel is not being patronized by a bunch of left wing liberals with tongue rings and blue hair. The people who go to Cracker Barrel, the people that I see in church on Sunday, the people that I see on the high school football games on Friday night, they're not people who worked at USAID, and there are not people who are out right now chanting about this, that, and the other on the streets of lower Manhattan. And so forget about whether you think it is subjectively woke. It is objectively ridiculous that Cracker Barrel would deliberately take an action that would alienate a large part of their customer base. And I wish that BlackRock, I wish that Vanguard and State Street would be a rational voice in the room and say, wait, have you guys thought about this? Because it doesn't make any sense. And Azoria will always be that voice. We will always stand up for the investors and the shareholders that have given us this awesome responsibility to represent them.
To me, that's so crucial, because the basis of our system is fiduciaries doing the right thing, and the base of our system is free markets. And I remember having philosophical debates, uh, and I kept saying, I would be ready to consider what you are already doing, which I think is wrong, the day you show me the data that we at University of Chicago have shown you for the last 50 years, which is it's all about shareholder value. And you might disagree with this and vote accordingly, and we'll live with the consequences. But until then, I don't want you to take the eye off the ball, which is it's about shareholder value. And the fact that these big organizations that you just mentioned, like I don't think the CEO of BlackRock or any of the top partners of BlackRock who make a gazillion dollars a year, I don't think they even know that that's happening five layers underneath them. It's somebody, that's been embedded in there, that's making this noise, and it is so bad for our for free markets. I don't like to use the word capitalism because I think that there's always with capitalism they always end up with the nepotism and a bunch of crazy crony and so on. So I always use free markets because I think they're a lot cleaner. But that's a real problem. And ISS is in there because again I've been there, done that. Um, and it's going to be, I mean, you need to be a million times bigger, or there has to be 100 people like you to counterbalance, because I don't know if the other side will ever change.
That's right. I mean, they certainly outnumber us and they're going to outspend us. But I think that organized investors will always beat out organized money. And that's what we represent. I mean, the fact that we are having this conversation means that we have a shot of moving the needle and moving the national conversation. And I got to tell you, we went to Best Buy very early on in our research. And we said, look, right here, right now, you have this DEI quota that 1 in 3 new employees must be BIPOC. We would like to invest. We think there's real upside in your business. We think the market doesn't fully appreciate the thesis that you are really the only brick and mortar consumer electronics retail in America. That wasn't the case 20 years ago when I was growing up. Remember, you had Circuit
Yeah,
City, you had CompUSA,
everybody.
you had Tiger Direct. So Best Buy really has carved out a niche there. And we went to them and said, hey, we can invest. And a month later, they had dropped the policy. And now Best Buy is a member of the Azoria 500 Meritocracy Fund. And think about that. We did that even before we launched, even before we had a dollar of capital. And
Yeah.
so I'm a big believer in the marketplace of ideas. I know you are, Guy, as well, that may the best argument win. Wherever that argument comes from, wherever that analysis comes from, be it Larry Fink, be it me, be it whomever, make the best argument. Money can only get you so far. There's nothing like a succinct, cogent, evidence based argument to convince a company or someone to do something that, let's be clear, this is in their own best interest. This is a literal win win. It does
Yeah.
not benefit us at the expense of them. It benefits every single employee at Best Buy who owns stock.
Yeah.
It benefits every single shareholder, whether they're with Azoria or not. And so we make that case honestly. And we're not here to declare war. We're not here to shame. We're not here to dox. We are here to simply present the argument. And I think most of the time we will prevail on that.
It's funny when you explain that it's not a zero-sum game. I think people understand that. So it's interesting you're doing what you're doing. About 2 years ago, in the dark depth of a Post-Inflation Reduction Act, I was
Mm,
looking at raising a fund called the American Dream Fund for private companies. Because remember, the Inflation Reduction Act money that was going out had a million strings attached. And my thought was, I just want to invest in companies that are all where somebody's living their all-American dream, and they don't want strings attached to get a grant from the government. They want to do what's best for their company. And
correct.
at the time, I remember, putting out the prospectus and so on, and of course, then luckily the election changed, and all of that craziness went away, but it was my way of doing it on the private side, what you're doing on the public side, because unfortunately, it had gone down that far, which is if you wanted money from the city or a tax break from the city or something from the county or the state or of course the federal government, you had to play up. You had to play by those rules, which were,
Correct.
so this was even forced rather than independent, because these were small American businesses. They weren't paying attention to all this the crazy stuff going on. So we were on the same page on this. But so I have to also now move on to one of my favorite things that you have come up with, which is the Doge dividend. So tell me about that, because I was one of your biggest fans on this, and I've written about it. And with my mixture of politics and finance, our side was saying that's crazy. You got to cut down the budget. We have a deficit. Da, 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 da. And I won't tell you my opinion yet, but just tell me about that.
Absolutely. So gosh, it seems like forever ago, but this was in February of this year, shortly after Doge launched. And really, as you know, Guy, hit the ground running. I mean, USAID, NPR, all of that stuff. I mean, it was an abomination, right? It was $20 million to Iraq for Sesame Street. And the way they justified it, the way they bent over backwards. Oh, it's a counterinsurgency program that is going to win the hearts and minds of the infidels, and Big Bird and Elmo are going to disabuse the Islamists of their radical Wahhabism. It was bizarre. And I think my approach was, if you want to kill the terrorists, right? I mean, that's how you get rid of them. You don't do that with Bert and Ernie. And actually, in fact, the Bert and Ernie, as a side note, the Bert and Ernie would likely further radicalize people. But the point is, if you want to be completely honest, but I guess the point is, it's not enough. And the thesis that I think about as an investor, I think about everything in terms of a thesis. The thesis was, could we go a step further? It was not enough, Guy, to identify waste, fraud, and abuse, to cut waste, fraud, and abuse. I think you had to take a small part of that and send it back to the folks who worked so hard, sent it to DC in the first place, and were abused. They did not believe their money was being sent to DC to be then sent off to Iraq and pilfered by US aid and so on. They actually expected that money to be sent to DC to be used to support education and infrastructure and the VA and the Department of Defense. And the thesis was, great, you can cut all this stuff, you can identify it, you can make a lot of noise and a lot of news about this egregious spending. But at some point, you have to say you're sorry. And look, this is not President Trump's fault that all of this money was squandered. But I think he had the awesome responsibility of identifying, cutting it. And then, as our proposal laid out, that was later endorsed by Elon and the president, was to take 20% of that, just 20%, and send it back to the taxpayers, really as restitution. They overpaid their taxes, right? If you sent your money to DC and part of it was sent to Iraq for Sesame Street, or Colombia for a transgender opera, or Mozambique for circumcisions, and we cut all of that, then you have to take some of that and give it back, because by definition, you overpaid if that's not what you had signed up for. And so that was the thesis. But I got to tell you, what is different about this versus this new proposal that is being floated by Senator Josh Hawley of a tariff dividend is very different. And the reason why is, the core view behind the Doge dividend was that people, taxpayers, regular people, were going to play a role in identifying waste, fraud, and abuse. And that if you incentivize them by saying, we're going to take 20% of whatever we end up cutting and give it back to the taxpayers, that number would grow larger the more people reported waste, fraud, or abuse. So, for example, you saw HUD, the Housing Urban Development Agency, committing fraud in your neighborhood. You could call that in. We could cut that, and we could increase the amount of savings and then increase the size of the Doge dividend checks. If you were a hurricane victim after FEMA, as I was growing up in Florida, and you saw abuse of taxpayer resources, you could call that in. It would get cut. The amount of savings would be larger, and therefore the Doge dividend. And so there was a real beauty to this virtuous feedback loop that said that when you told people they were going to get money at a later date, they would actually end up being a part of the effort to cut and save in a way that tariffs just don't. I'm very supportive of the president's tariff policy and reshoring and manufacturing agenda. But the truth is that paying someone a tariff dividend check doesn't increase total tariff revenue. When you tell somebody that, hey, there's going to be more savings if you can call in waste, fraud, and abuse and report it, that is an actual positive reinforcement mechanism that doesn't exist with the tariff check. And so I would definitely support the tariff revenue going down to pay the debt. And I would support a Doge dividend so long as it's very clear to the public that the more we save because of your efforts, the larger your check is. And that creates a clear incentive structure for Americans.
Yeah, again, it was a great idea. I think it was spoken about by everybody. It's funny to me. Uh, I immediately jumped to politics, which is not, I've only been in politics 4 years. I ran 2 years, in 2022. But you see, you and I were wonkish, and we love to have these conversations about the inner workings of all these things, and what a tariff means, and is it a tax, is it not a tax, and and we kind of get stuck in our own bubble, if you like, of debate, and then we debate the other side, and some of them are wonkish as well, and they usually have more of an emotional piece to their work. But the first thing to me that came to mind was politics. So I bet you 70% of people know what Doge is and is doing, but have no idea
Yeah.
how and what savings and where they come from, and the fact that people, you incentivize people to do it. So what better way ahead of the midterm elections, whereby by history the party in charge loses seats, what better way than to send a check signed by your president, and maybe on the envelope that comes from your congressperson, your Republican, or the person who's running against them, to remind people of what everything that someone like you has been doing, and everybody in the cabinet and all these incredibly hardworking people in the administration. What better way to remind them that, oh my gosh, I got a $2,000 check. That means Christmas is going to be this year. I think we can take the kids skiing this year for Christmas.
Right.
What better way to do that? And I still strongly fight. And of course, we get the resistance on our own side. Oh, you got to cut back the deficit. Like, I'm a conservative economic guy, and I understand the deficit's worrying me, and so is the spending and so on. But this, like as you said, somebody overpaid by a lot. And all you're saying is, I'm giving you your money back. And by the way, there's an election in 4 months. So anyway, that was how I interpreted it. I don't know, so hopefully that idea doesn't go away, because I do think it's a very good one. And the president is probably one of the most brilliant uh, showmen slash politicians. He must know what that will do. So,
Correct. And I think with the tariff check in particular, Guy, you're absolutely right, especially going into the midterms, because there's been this narrative peddled in the media, and it's completely false that tariffs are a tax on Americans. Well, I don't know. Is the iPhone more expensive this year than it was last year? Right? Is your car more expensive this year than it was last year? Are your eyeglasses, your tennis shoes more expensive this year? And so at some point, we have to just cut the BS and look around, and it's a pretty powerful metaphor to tell people, well, your prices didn't go up, but we generated $170 billion of revenue, and here's a check for you, right? That's a really powerful narrative. I mean, really
mhm.
powerful, because it is truly a win win. What this president's been able to accomplish to get all of these countries that have ripped us off for decades to come to pay us as they should, to pay us to be a part of our markets, and then to not see any increase in prices, and then to cut the taxpayer in on those tariff revenues is an extraordinary idea that, yes, I think is good politics, but more than anything, I think is good economics.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, and I think the you're right. It's amazing, when you're involved in economics like we are. And then you said you put your money where your mouth was, which was Biden was going to give us inflation. And I can't tell you how many posts I put out saying, this is crazy. This is going to cause inflation. And by definition, you're flooding. I tried every possible approach without sounding like a, ivory tower economist, to explain to people that this is going to cause inflation. And of course it did. And of course it broke people's backs. And during the campaign, I was speaking on behalf of the president, before the president, at many of the rallies in Nevada, and I would say, this is taking away your American dream. Inflation and interest rates, forget it. You don't have an American dream anymore, and that's what this is all about. So then they used the same game plan that we did, and then you heard about avocados and Corona beer, right? Being so expensive. And the reality is, as you just mentioned, and by the way, I'm as surprised as many people. Somehow it's not being passed on dollar to dollar. And I don't know, you probably know the number because you're better at this than I am, but we're not, like you said, I'm not paying 50% more for, pick the item where the country is getting a 50% tariff or 25%. And then they said, oh yeah, but people did a bunch of inventory. Well, economic lag, that's past. There's no more inventory. So this is it. We're seeing it. So again, it's one of these things where someone like you needs to continually explain to people. And again, you're better than me than I am on this one. But just telling people, okay, so the tariff has increased something by $3, you're only paying 15 cents. And let me tell you why. Because the importer's taking some of the hit, the country of origin is taking some of the hit, the store that's selling has decided they're going to keep their price. So we need to explain that to people, because again, one more time, they're using our game plan on us. Oh, tariffs are going to cause inflation. Hey, we'll show you, you'll see. Oh, well, ground meat costs this. Anyway, so what's your thought about that?
I think you're absolutely right. And I think the way to frame it is you pay the tariff on the import price, not on the retail price. And so there were cases where there was protein mix for protein shakes being bought on Amazon for $30, but the price to import it was $1. And so if there's 100% tariff, it goes from the import price being $1 to $2. So there
Yeah.
was a $29 margin, and now there's a $28 margin. So many people got rich ripping people off with this East Asian American product arbitrage where they would buy the same thing on Alibaba for $1, drop ship it through Amazon for $30, and just collect $29. And the truth of the matter is, Guy, that was unsustainable. And so the free market came in, corrected that, made profit margins reasonable again. You weren't going to make a killing on that every single year. And that's why you haven't seen prices go up. It's because profit margins were so out of whack that what the tariffs did is it just started to normalize them.
Yeah, that's a great. I mean, Timu, right? That's a great example, and
Timo, exactly right.
they talked about that a lot. And I think these are the kind of things that I think our people have to understand, which is that there was so much room for margin that they're not gonna throw it on you, because that's what it is. The other thing, obviously, is we do have a lot of leverage, being the United States, and for the first time in my life that I've been following politics 40 years now, somebody is using leverage in our favor. That we have,
Correct.
which as a negotiator, so, but this has been incredibly helpful. So what's next? I mean, you come up with a great idea every 6 months. So what should I be expecting? I
No pressure. The
don't
we're
want
going
to
to
put
keep
you on the spot here.
going to keep supporting the president in his economic agenda any way that we can. It's a really it's an incredible privilege to do that from the outside. I think from the outside we can move a lot quicker and we can amplify things and get out there in a way that if we were inside we would just be naturally slowed down. Not that this administration is bureaucratic in any way, but there's a natural increase in bureaucracy when you go from running your own firm to working in an institution. But we just stand ready to provide that context and that analysis to the president's economic agenda, and then when and where necessary, introduce interesting ideas that we think will resonate with Americans.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And please, you've seen my background. I also want to do the same. So if you want to ever shoot the breeze with somebody and have them discuss the ideas with you, I'd love to do that. I'd love to be in that role. I really care about this country that adopted me and accepted me, kind of like what your mom said. And I want to give back as much as I can. And it's people like you with your ideas that make a difference. And I want to make sure, I can, through my intellect and hopefully, the connections and all of these other things that I have, just help. So please feel free to do that.
I certainly will. I certainly will. I really appreciate the
All righty.
opportunity. Great chatting with you.
Well, Well, thank you so much. I know you're very busy, and I know you gave us 50 minutes of your time, so I really really appreciate it. I'm going to wish you luck, but I know you're going to succeed anyway. It doesn't matter with your fund. So you guys are going to kill it. There's no question in my mind, and I think we keep fighting the good fight.
I do look forward to it. I look forward to seeing you in the trenches.
All right. Thank you so much. I do too. All right.
Thanks, Guy.
Have a
Appreciate it.
great rest of the week. All right. Bye
You
bye.
as well. Bye bye.
Bye.